Okay, so we're diving deep today into a story that's just heartbreaking, really. The Fundão Dam disaster in Brazil.
Yeah, this one is tough.
It happened back in 2015, and to be honest, it's one of those events that you almost can't believe actually occurred.
Right. It's like something out of a nightmare.
Absolutely.
And
So for those who might not remember all the details, we're talking about a dam that collapsed, and I don't mean a small leak or a crack. This thing just completely gave way.
totally. And what was it holding back? Millions of cubic meters of toxic sludge. Just a horrific wave of this stuff.
It's hard to even fathom that amount, you
I
know?
mean, try to picture it, this thick, viscous mud just surging downstream, wiping out everything in its path.
19 lives were lost in the initial collapse, and entire villages were simply wiped off the map, gone.
And that's not even the half of it. This sludge, it was full of heavy metals. We're talking mercury, arsenic, all kinds of nasty stuff.
The kind of stuff that contaminates everything it touches, the water, the soil, the air.
Exactly. It poisons the entire ecosystem. And the Dos River, which is this major waterway in the region, it was just completely overwhelmed.
Yeah, this river, it wasn't just some small stream. This was a source of life for so many people in the region.
Absolutely. Their drinking water, fishing grounds, their livelihoods, it all depended on the Dos River.
And then the sludge just kept traveling over 600 kilometers all the way to the Atlantic Ocean.
Unbelievable, right? And it wasn't like it just disappeared into the ocean either. This contamination, it spreads, it lingers, it affects marine life, coastal communities. It's just devastating.
It's hard to wrap your head around the scale of it all. And then you add in the fact that over 500,000 people were affected by this disaster in some way, and it just becomes staggering.
Yeah, the human impact is really what makes this story so tragic, and that's where we really want to focus our deep dive today.
Because on top of all the immediate destruction, the long-term consequences of this disaster are still unfolding, even now, almost a decade later.
Right, and there is another layer to the story that makes it even more difficult to process.
You're talking about the legal battle, right?
Yeah, I mean, you would think that with a disaster of this magnitude, with this much evidence, there would be some sense of justice, some accountability.
But that's not really what happened, is it?
Nope. Samarco, the company responsible for the dam, which is actually a joint venture between Vale and BHP Billiton, two mining giants, they were acquitted.
Acquitted. So even with all the evidence of environmental damage, the loss of life, the complete devastation of communities, they weren't held responsible.
Not criminally, no. And that's a big part of what makes this case so fascinating and so troubling.
So let's unpack that a bit. You've been deep in the research on this. Help me understand how this is even possible.
Okay, so like with a lot of these large-scale industrial accidents, the legal battle gets very complex very quickly. There are so many factors to consider, layers of responsibility, and let's not forget the immense resources that these corporations have at their disposal.
Yeah, they can afford armies of lawyers, delay tactics, the whole 9 yards.
Exactly. And in this case, the Brazilian legal system, well, it's different from what we might be used to in other parts of the world. The burden of proof, the way they establish criminal liability, it's all a bit different.
So even though it seems clear-cut to us, to the average person looking at this situation, legally, it wasn't so straightforward.
Not at all. The case got bogged down in procedural delays, appeals, challenges to evidence. And ultimately, the court found that there wasn't enough evidence to directly link the companies to the dam's failure in a way that met their specific definition of criminal negligence.
Okay, so maybe I can sort of understand the legal technicalities, but how does that sit with the people whose lives were completely upended by this disaster?
I mean, how could it possibly sit well with them? They lost their homes, their loved ones, their livelihoods, and the companies responsible basically walked away scot-free.
It must feel like a slap in the face, like the system failed them completely.
That's exactly how many of them feel. And that's why this case is so important. It raises questions about how we hold corporations accountable, especially these massive multinational ones, for environmental crimes.
Because it's not just about assigning blame, is it? It's about preventing something like this from happening again.
Absolutely. And when there are no consequences, what incentive do companies have to change their practices, to prioritize safety and environmental protection over profit?
It's a chilling thought, really. And it makes you wonder, what does this mean for other communities, other ecosystems that are at risk from similar industrial activities?
Right, because this isn't an isolated incident. There are dams, mines, industrial facilities all over the world that are operating in similar conditions with similar risks.
So what are the lessons here? What can we learn from the Fundão Dam disaster that might help prevent future tragedies?
I think the first lesson is that we need stronger regulations, stricter enforcement, and more transparency.
Because it sounds like in this case, there were some warning signs, some indications that the dam wasn't as stable as it should have been.
That's right. And there were concerns raised, but they weren't adequately addressed. So we need systems in place that prioritize safety and environmental protection over speed and profit.
And that's not just a responsibility of the companies. It's a responsibility of governments as well, right? To create and enforce these regulations.
Absolutely. It's a shared responsibility. And it requires real commitment, not just lip service.
But it also feels like it goes beyond just laws and regulations. It's about a shift in mindset, isn't it?
Mm.
A change in how we value human life and the environment.
Yeah, I think that's a crucial point. We have to start seeing these issues as interconnected. We can't just focus on economic growth at the expense of everything else.
Because, at the end of the day, what's the point of all that growth if it comes at the cost of destroying the very planet we depend on?
Exactly. And that's why the Fundão Dam disaster is such a powerful reminder. It forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about our priorities, about the systems we've created.
And it begs the question, if this disaster, with all its devastation, didn't lead to meaningful change, what will?
It's a question we all have to grapple with, and I don't have all the answers, but I know we need to keep asking these questions, keep pushing for accountability, keep fighting for a better future.
Because what's the alternative? To just accept that these kinds of tragedies are inevitable, that corporate profits always trump human lives and the health of our planet.
I don't know about you, but I'm not willing to accept that, and I don't think most people are.
I hope you're right. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. We've talked about the big systemic issues, the need for stricter regulations, for corporate responsibility. But what about us as individuals? What can we do in our own lives to make a difference?
That's a great question, and it's something I think about a lot. There's a tendency when we're faced with these huge, complex issues to feel powerless, like our individual actions don't matter.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a really common feeling.
But I think that's a trap we have to avoid, because even small actions, multiplied by millions of people, can create real change.
So what are some of those small actions? Give us some concrete things we can do.
Well, for starters, we can become more informed consumers. We can support companies that are taking real steps to operate sustainably and ethically.
Vote with our wallets, as they say.
Exactly. And we can hold the companies we do business with accountable, ask questions about their environmental and social practices, let them know that we care about these issues.
And beyond our consumer choices, we can also get involved in advocacy efforts, support organizations that are working to protect the environment and hold corporations accountable.
Right. And don't underestimate the power of your voice. Talk to your friends and family about these issues. Share information on social media. Contact your elected officials and let them know that you expect them to prioritize environmental protection and corporate responsibility.
Because at the end of the day, we're all connected to this planet. What affects one community, one ecosystem, ultimately affects us all.
That's the truth. The Fundão Dam disaster is a stark reminder of that. But it's also a reminder that we have the power to create a different future. A future where these kinds of tragedies are not just unfortunate accidents, but lessons learned, opportunities for change.
It's a long and difficult road ahead, but it's a journey we have to take. For ourselves, for future generations, for the planet we all share.
Well said. I think that's a good place to leave it.
Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. It's been heavy, but it's been important. And I hope it sparks some thought, some action, some hope in our listeners. We can do better. We have to do better.
Agreed. We owe it to ourselves and to the planet to try.
Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep diving deep.